Okay, folks, no more excuses here. We apologize for that. Please come back to us. Hang on a second. We want to get the viewers to come back. Come back in. We're back. That was a user error on the guy behind the camera, not the ones in front of it here. There we go. People are coming back now. We're glad to have you back. Jump right in. Populate. I apologize. That was an adjustment we were trying to make on the fly. Didn't work out so well. But we're going to go back to the question that we started here just a moment ago when somebody, maybe me, pushed the wrong button. I apologize for that anyway. Asking about evacuation routes. It's a question that we get a lot, wondering what evacuation routes should a person use in the event of an emergency. We hear this a lot. We get questions from folks often saying, can I have a copy of the evacuation route that I'll need to get away from a yet to be declared emergency? So Brianna was starting to explain when things kind of went a little haywire. We apologize for that, but please go ahead.
Thanks, Russ. So to best answer the question, and again, I hope that you can hear me okay. If not, leave a comment and we'll try and talk louder. So to best answer the question regarding evacuation routes, in this county, Yuba County, we have 3 rivers that rise and fall. We also have a very fast rising creek that rises and falls very fast and has the potential to inundate roadways. At some point throughout the county, all of our major highways traverse one of these bodies of water. That being said, every disaster is very dynamic. No disaster is ever the same. And the evacuation routes are going to be very dependent upon the disaster that we're facing. So your best option is to be familiar with evacuation routes that are known to you. Know your roadways, know the back ways to get out of the areas that you are frequently in. Know multiple ways out and have a plan. And then in the event of a disaster, look towards us here at Yuba County OES to be able to provide you with information regarding the conditions of those roads. We coordinate very heavily with Caltrans and Public Works during our disaster times, and we have folks that have eyes on the ground who can notify you if a road has been inundated. In 86, if you headed north, you were driving into floodwaters. In 97, if you headed south, you were driving into floodwaters. So it's very important to understand all the different areas and ways out of this area that you can get, and be aware of them. So, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, just that in a fire situation, it's a moving target, and it's very important to not only know for fire purposes, but for for inundations, to be able to be signed up for Code Red. And you can do all the preparation that you want, but if you're not signed up to get notifications from the county, you could be asleep, you could be watching TV, not get the notification, and end up in a bad situation, which we do not want. We want you to be prepared. We want you to be ready to go. So when you receive that phone call, you're out the door, and you and your family and your animals can be safe.
All right. Okay, and we had, Randy was saying, might have missed the first few things we talked about. We did talk earlier about the whole idea that the 5th and 10th Street bridges, will they be closed again? And Brianna explained that that's in the jurisdiction of the 2 cities, Marysville and Yuba City. They make the decision on those bridges. Sometimes it's based on how backlogged those bridges get in traffic, trying to get to and from. That can create log jams for other people trying to move to safety. So those decisions, again, are in the hands of our 2 cities. We also had the question about our ability to, through the Code Red system, to identify certain areas having a problem, or does the whole county get hit with a broadcast from Code Red? And Scott explained that they're able to take a map on the computer through Code Red and identify whether it's actually drawing around certain areas or using certain diagrams to locate certain areas of the county they could just send these broadcasts to, so they could be a little more specific. So, and there are more questions coming in. We will monitor those.
Do you want some new questions?
Yeah, you have a new question? Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this question came in from Wyatt. Does OES have shelter-in-place locations pre-designated in the foothills for fast-moving fires?
No, we do not. We do not have pre-designated locations. If you are to shelter in place, you should do so in your own home, and you should be ready to shelter in place prior to any type of fire. And we do not recommend sheltering in place, only as an absolute last-ditch effort. But you should go online, find out what is important, find out what you will need, because that is, especially during a fire, a very dangerous avenue to go down. Do you have anything to add on that, Bree?
No.
And one person mentioned the site. During an emergency, we will populate or fill up a web page that's yuba.org/emergency. And on that page, that can be reached from BePreparedYuba.org or from yuba.org. That emergency page will be where you'll go to click on shelters to show where the shelters would be, evacuation routes when we get the proper ones, the safe places to roads to move along. That's where you'll go. You can look at that page now, yuba.org/emergency. You can see what's there now. Right now, it's just a placeholder for information. During an emergency, we will fill it up with all the information that you need to get to safe ground. All right.
Another new question here.
Kevin Lowe, go ahead.
Okay. We have another new question here from Jason. He asks, we learned with the Oroville Dam evacuation that our current highway system that goes through Marysville is extremely inadequate for mass evacuations. Is there any movement with the Marysville bypass and or a second Highway 70 bridge south of Marysville and or widening of the existing East Street Bridge into Highway 70 south of Marysville? It's kind of a long question. Did you guys get all?
Yeah, we got it. Do you want to take it or you want me to take it?
Go ahead.
So at this point, we understand that there was a lot of frustration during that evacuation. We had people that were basically parked in the roadway trying to get fuel. So one of the things that we really highly recommend is that you do not go below half a tank of gas. And we are not aware of the widening of the East Street Bridge. And basically, for things to get better, there needs to be more pavement. That's the way that this is going to work. And I think that's where that question was going. But we are not aware of Caltrans providing any additional asphalt to move vehicles in an expeditious manner. That's why it's so important that when we call for an evacuation, whether you're receiving it from, through the city of Marysville or through the county, you leave immediately. That's why you have go bags. You've got your medication, you've got your food, you've got your important papers ready to go. You've got your animals, your children, you're ready to get out of town so you can leave immediately. Don't wait to evacuate, because we may not be able to get out the calls expeditiously enough, because obviously if we're pushing out a large number of calls through Code Red, it takes more time. So if you see smoke, if you are aware of a breach, or you see something of danger, let us know, get out of town, and make sure that you get your family to a safe location.
And I would also say, not to lessen this question, I would also say that in the Oroville situation, it's important to keep in mind that according to the Department of Homeland Security, from them directly, the Oroville spillway was the single largest peacetime, no notice evacuation in the history of the United States.
Good point. I had forgot about that.
there was Denise yesterday, a couple days ago, had a question for us. Denise was asking about senior care homes that we have in the region, of course, and she was actually referring to one that was in Yuba City during the spillway incident. Apparently, she was trying to get to her mom, and she called and was told that the administrator was caught in traffic, that they were waiting for the administrator to show up to actually put the to implement the processes that was needed to get the folks in the senior care facility to safety. She was concerned about that. It terrified her. Obviously, we've heard a few of those stories in the past. What is the responsibility? Where does the responsibility lie for taking care of these senior care homes?
So I'll go ahead and take that one. Each care home is supposed to have their own plan, and we have found through the Orville spillway incident that some of the care homes did not, and they relied on public transit. Was called in to evacuate, and I understand Denise's concerns. Obviously, in Yuba County, we're going to step in if there is not a plan. We have spoke with Yuba Sutter Transit. We have spoke with the school district on numerous occasions. We have been told and repeatedly told that they will be there for us to help evacuate our folks with access and functional needs, our elderly, people who have disabilities. And so I am not sure, and I don't want to get into naming what this care facility's name is, but I would get a hold of their administrator now while there's not an issue going on, and demand that they provide you with a plan. And if not, then get a hold of the California Department of Public Health.
And that becomes a big issue, I take it, because in this community divided by a large river in the Yuba Sutter area, that some may have family members in a care home they can't get to necessarily. If the bridge closes, I figure they'd want to know where their family member is going to be taken in the event of an emergency. Would that be part of a plan?
Yeah, exactly. That would be part of a plan to move them out of the area, out of harm's way, not to a like facility across the river, but somewhere down, if it's in Yuba City, somewhere down in Sacramento, or somewhere down in Woodland, or somewhere out of harm's way. Not just, okay, we have a plan that says that we're going to move to a like facility in Yuba County. Because if the Feather River is affecting Yuba County, it's affecting Sutter County. We're really one large community when it comes to disasters, and we need to think that way. And hopefully, this administrator has changed his ways a bit since that event.
Okay, I'm going to interject here. Sylvia had a question for anybody just joining and not sure what's going on. This is just a Q&A time where our emergency services team is answering questions from the community about how we handle, as a larger entity, handle emergencies, how we address them, how we prepare for them. What happens, it's basically before, during, and after an emergency, how our emergency services tackles the job. Jason was asking about opportunities for volunteers. I think a lot of that happens during an event where we might look to people to volunteer to help out with certain situations. I know that we had in the campfire, there were many opportunities for volunteers to plug in, whether it was the care of animals, where it was working with larger organizations to provide meals for evacuees. Maybe you could address that a little bit.
So I would say your best opportunity to volunteer with one of the organizations that's activated during a disaster would be to, number one, think about what type of work it is that you'd like to do during a disaster, whether you want to be working with serving food, or if you want to be working with animals, and then try to partner with groups that are already in existence for that. When we have volunteers that come and stand up and say, what can I do? I want to volunteer. It's not the most convenient time, because there is a vetting process that we like to put our volunteers through, or these organizations like to put their volunteers through, just to ensure that, number one, people have the proper training, reduced liability for injury, or potential, I should say, for injury during a disaster, as well as ensuring that the folks that we are sheltering and the animals that we are sheltering are being properly cared for and safe. So really try to reach out with organizations that you might have an interest in, that are associated with the volunteer work you're interested in doing, and try to get in touch with them. And if you have questions, you can call our office, and we can kind of connect you to some of those organizations that we regularly use and that we have agreements with in place.
And I hope that's helpful. And any of these things that questions that are asked, I mean, you can call our emergency services team, which is either one of these folks will answer the phone here. And what's the number of OES?
It's 530-749-7520.
So just to let you know, you folks are welcome to call anytime with questions. They especially like helping folks who are having a hard time with maybe signing up for code red alerts. They will actually help you with the process to make sure they want everybody to be signed up. So they're available for that as well. A question from Wyatt about does OES have a community emergency response team to help the disabled or elderly? You kind of addressed that a little bit, that you will initiate responses to those with special needs.
So is that specifically the type of question?
Yeah, it's a question about community emergency response team.
Okay, so we don't have a team. We use fire and law enforcement, and then we also utilize the Yuba Sutter Transit and the school district, like we had said. We would also rely on in-home supportive services staff to assist with those folks, and also we have our team with Health and Human Services. So we do have a group of folks that we utilize and look to in the time of need, but we don't have a specific team, as you would call it.
Okay. Now this might go with the question there. We've had some questions about this whole idea of why don't you open all the lanes, like saying heading south on Highway 70? Why aren't all lanes open during a larger scale evacuation, obviously, to move people out? Why are there still two directions of traffic allowed? And this kind of goes to that, I think, a little bit, to assisting others.
Yeah, so we have had conversations about that in depth, especially after the spillway incident, of course. We're going to keep referring back to that because it was the largest evacuation that we've seen. But it's called contraflow. And what you need to do is, to set that up is very labor intensive. You need a significant number of law enforcement and barricades to stop people from going the wrong way, especially when contraflow starts. People may come from a side street. I mean, you just think about downtown Marysville, how many roads there are that lead to the highway, and that would take you northbound or southbound. So you need to really think about that. And also you need a way for emergency vehicles. They still have to go to calls, and that's one of the most important things. Is they're going to these houses where people may be bedridden or may need assistance to get out of their home because they're wheelchair bound, whatever the situation might be. So fire, law enforcement, EMS, they're still doing all of their jobs. And if we clog up the roadways both directions, how are they going to get around? We had this conversation with Sean Harris, who was the commander with the Yuba Sutter CHP. shortly after the spillway incident, and he's firmly against contraflow, just because of some of the things that I've identified.
All right, thank you, Scott. And I'll go back to a couple of the questions here. One person was asking, and you've heard this before again, I know in the foothills after the fires or the Cascade Fire, the discussion always comes up about the idea of sirens, that this idea has been bandied about. And it's worth serious consideration, but I know we've had these discussions. What maybe either one of you could tell us what has come out of these so far anyway.
I'll let you speak to that.
Okay, I'll speak to that.
You kind of kicked that off.
So, as many of you know, or hopefully many of you are watching that sit on the Fire Safe Council, I participate in that. I represent the county and OES on the Fire Safe Council. We've brought back information that talks about or that provides information that sirens are normally used in flatlands. You normally see them in the Tornado Alley, those type of locations. They're not typically used in the terrain that we see in our foothills. And the reason for that is because you need so many, and you need power to them, and they're out really in the middle of nowhere. You may have battery backup, you may have a generator, but if a fire is burning, it's going to come through and take the signal down for the cell tower. So, or not the cell tower, but the siren tower. And we looked into it, and just for the area of Dobbins Organ House, it was somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars. From what I can recall, it's been quite some time since we got that information. But the county's not against sirens. Let's make that very clear. If that was the one size fits all, and we were able to do that, then that would be the go-to. But as we stand right now, I'm sure that you can understand that there's peaks and valleys, and putting sirens on top of mountaintops or in valleys is not going to allow for people to hear the sirens go off. We are looking at alternatives to sirens. Pete Hammondtree has brought something to our attention where we're looking at a redundant system that would help to supplement Code Red, and we are still looking at that. But as with everything else, it comes down to funding, and we are looking into that, and we'll have a report at the next Fire Safe Council meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And a lot of the questions we are getting, you answered actually quite a few of them just in the last second. I mean, people were asking what kind of technology has changed, or what are you looking forward to? And you mentioned a lot of that. And I know there's a federal system that comes into play also for this similar types of notifications. Is that right?
Right. So the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System is been around for quite some time. We've had access to that through the National Weather Service for many years. But we now have our own access where we can actually launch iPods, and that will push out notifications, override television, those type of things. So we're always looking to get better. There's always new technology, but we do feel very confident in our Code Red system. When we first started, we had about 30,000 people that had phone numbers in the system, and now we're over 60,000. Now, we're not saying that 60,000 people in the county are signed up, because people can sign up with multiple phone numbers and emails and text messages and those type of things. But we have made significant strides over the last 5 years in getting people to sign up, and we're very proud of that. We've got a long ways to go. We know that, but then that's why we're doing these type of forums, is so that we can get people to understand that they absolutely need to get signed up for Code Red, and that we are continuing to look for redundant and other tools to put in our toolbox.
And maybe as we're waiting for a few other questions to come in, I talked to you about this earlier. I might put this out there. Just walking us through what happened in February of 2017. Everybody, I think, watching this broadcast right now remembers the spillway. Remembers that a few days earlier, we started seeing a break apart of the spillway, and it culminated into February 12th, when the call came in late in the afternoon on a Sunday saying that the spillway was in imminent danger of collapsing, calling for a full evacuation of anybody there on the valley floor. So, but maybe you could walk us through that day, or the days leading up to it, the day of. What if people were standing here in this room in the Emergency Operations Center, what would they have seen in the course of the days leading up to it, and on February 12th itself, and the days following even? Just kind of walk people through that.
You were there.
You were there, yeah.
So in the days leading up to, our EOC was activated, our Emergency Operations Center, which is where we are now, and there were many people sitting and staffing each of these workstations behind us, and we were monitoring all of the conditions. We were trying to get information from DWR. We were taking the National Weather Service forecast that we had. We were monitoring the current river levels and the forecasted river levels, and we were really just trying to make sure that all of the information that we had was correct, and our primary focus was public safety. As you know, this is what our office, that's our primary goal, and really what we're after is ensuring that all of our residents are safe. And in the events leading up to the actual spillway, when we got the notification, there were the EOC was still fully activated, and we still had staff here, and there was a robocall that had gone out, and I'll let you take it from here because you were really the one in that conversation and how all that played out.
Okay, so very shortly thereafter, receiving that call sometime around 4 p.m., there was a lot of excitement, as you could imagine. The sheriff, then Steve Durfer, was here, the CAO Robert Bendorf, myself, Rich Webb from Linda Fire Protection District, representatives from the city of Marysville were here. Chris Sachs, the chief of Marysville, was here, and the decision was made between Robert and the sheriff and I that we needed to evacuate immediately because the emergency spillway was an imminent failure. And the mapping that we had at that time showed that there was significant inundation that would occur because we did not have the spillway, the emergency spillway failure. The only one we had was the actual normal spillway that's used on a regular basis. That's the only information that we had. So we made that call. We quickly decided, actually even before then, I placed a phone call to our partner up in Nevada County, our emergency manager, John Gulsarian, and we made some arrangements to head up there. And Brianna, bless her heart, took the bull by the horns, and the way that this EOC is designed is it's designed to be evacuated. So if you can see behind me, there's small computers on the back of the screens, and we're going to show you right now. And so basically all that we do is we unplug the Ethernet and the power cord, and we pick up the entire workstation, and we're out of here. So Brianna met several staff, Yuba County staff that lived in a location where they were able to get up to Nevada County quickly, and we were about a half an hour, 45 minutes behind her, and by the time we got up there, things were already rolling. Things were already being set up. We brought the remainder of the EOC, and within a very short time, we were completely up and running, and within a matter of hours had our phones transferred from our call center, and we were taking calls from our constituents, and they knew no different than if we were here or if we were up in Nevada County, because everything was so seamless. So we spent the next 4 days up in Nevada County, working very hard for the people of the county, making sure that they were updated, answering a lot of social media, doing a lot of different things to make sure that they were updated, and putting out the code red message spurred the big evacuation, which took 5 to 6 hours to get people out of Marysville, and that's unacceptable. We know that, but unfortunately, that without additional pavement to push vehicles through the town of Marysville and get us to Highway 70 and 65, we're going to be in the same situation unless we're prepared. The folks that got out quickly made it to Roseville in 40 minutes, and the people that ended up staying back and loading up their cars with a lot of their different items that they own, they got caught in traffic. So we can't stress enough to be prepared.
Okay. Again, for those just joining us, this is just an informational broadcast to help people understand a little more about the Yuba County Office of Emergency Services. We're talking about both past disasters and future, and the planning that goes into them, and the actions of the Office of Emergency Services. We're with Scott Bryan and Brianna Schutte here talking with you. And one question that came, and this is actually, I think, it kind of goes to what exactly does the Office of Emergency Services handle? A question here was about a 22-acre fire up in the foothills about 2.5 weeks ago. It was on their property. They got no phone call alerting them, wondering why. It sounds like they're wondering why the emergency services wasn't activated to notify these folks on a 22-acre fire. How does that work?
So, in the county and in the incident command structure, which is what the emergency services operates within, you have your local level first responders. And those local level first responders are your firefighters, your law enforcement, and then Office of Emergency Services. We come in when our local resources are tapped, meaning that they have no more resources that they can throw at an incident, and they have to start borrowing other resources from other counties. Office of Emergency Services, we come in to support in those situations. So this 22-acre fire was a fire that our local resources, I'm not sure who responded to that specific fire, but those folks on the ground felt that they had the appropriate level of resources to handle that specific disaster or incident, I should say. In the event that you felt like you got no notification, typically for those field responders, they will go to door and make notifications. Now, that is not using the code red system. If they felt that the code red system should have been utilized, they could have contacted the sheriff's office. The sheriff's office dispatch does have the ability to push out those notifications, as well as Yuba County Office of Emergency Services.
Okay.
Did you have anything that you want to add to that?
No, that
Okay.
was.
Okay, thank you. Wyatt did ask the question here about, has the 2015 county emergency plan been updated since 2017 or 2018?
Actually, it's designed to be reviewed every year, and it is required to be updated and approved by the Board of Supervisors every 5 years. We're actually doing it a year early, so in 2019, shortly we are going to be taking it to the Disaster Council and then to the full board for final adoption. So the emergency operations plan, like I said, is reviewed every year, and so as are all of our supporting annexes.
All right.
And just to kind of talk a little bit more about that, when we review it every year, generally we test it as well, whether it's with an actual disaster response or through exercises. And that's where a lot of those revisions come from, is with our findings or after action items that we've come up with. In areas that we can do better, we're constantly looking for ways that we can do better. And so I would really say that those revisions do happen annually, but they don't always necessarily get to the board annually. But yes, we are working on doing that early. So.
Okay. We had another question was asked about simply are things going out on Twitter and such. I can answer that a little bit as Rachel and I, this is Russ, and we do a lot of the communications for Scott and Brianna during the emergencies. They do not jump on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram or anything during an emergency. There's no time for that. That's why they have communications people. And we do have Facebook that automatically carries over into Twitter. We post, we get a larger following on Facebook, as it turns out. Twitter, it does reach a certain number of people, so we're always there as well. We try to reflect everything we do on Twitter. And it's and to give an example of that, when we posted about the evacuation, the first notice on February 12th, even though there were only 70, at the time, about 76,000 people in Yuba County, 420,000 people saw that Facebook, so it does post, so it does reach a lot of folks. I think Bob Harlan, our good friend Bob Harlan, he's out there. He had a question for us. Okay, talk about, and it's a good question. I mean, there might be another test coming up of the Code Red system. We talked about it in November, trying to do it a couple times a year. Wondering about the reach in Yuba County. Any things, any tripping points, I guess, in terms of signing people up that you've noticed? Is it hard for some people to get signed up in the Code Red system? Is it fairly simple? But I know you've always said you'll be there for it. But the whole process of signing up, how difficult is it?
If you're familiar with using a computer, it's a matter of a couple of minutes of your time. But if you are not familiar with using a computer, just like with anything else, it can be intimidating. So I encourage you to call our office and we will help you, we'll walk you through it. Or if you want to come down and see us, we'll show you the office and we'll sign you up. So, but there have been no glitches signing people up. It's seamless. Code Red's or Insolve is a great company to work with. Any problems that we've ever run into, which I can't actually think of any, we've been able to work with them very, very well.
Thank you. And actually, I think it's a good point that kind of feeds off that, is that we understand that over the past year now, Sutter County has also moved to the Code Red system, since we're in a two-county area. Is that going to help you a little bit to help people understand where to go? Can they all go to the same place to sign up, I guess is the question.
Well, there is the Be Prepared Yuba site and there's a Be Prepared Sutter site. We encourage people to go to the separate sites to sign up. If you do live in Yuba County but work in Sutter County, you can sign up using your work address in Sutter County. But for the most part, it's, it's like I said, it's really simple to sign up for it and go to bepreparedyuba.org to sign up for Code Red.
Right. And I'm just showing you the page on the screen here. That's the one you'll see when you bring it up. If you go to bepreparedyuba.org, you'll see an icon there for Code Red. Just click on it. It'll take you to this page. It's a fairly short process to sign up, making sure you identify a cell phone or more than one cell phone you want alerts to go to, email addresses. It'll ask you for your address, and that's mostly for geographic location. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right. It's called geocoding, and it's so when we select the area that we want to notify, you're in that area. So it means that your home is in that area to be called. And don't forget the home phones. I know that those are becoming things of the past, but I still have a home phone, and I know there's people out there that still do. And I would recommend getting your home phone registered because they don't die, they don't run, the battery doesn't die, and those type of things. So they're a little more robust.
And also, if you have a home phone, some people may get confused and think I have a home phone because it's a cordless phone, it's got a set of cordless phones, but it might be voice over IP, so voice over internet phone. So definitely continue to register your home phones because our Code Red system may not capture those VoIP phones.
Okay. Bob again was asking about the study recently about looking at Plumas Lake, that they have limited number of roadways, and that is an issue I think with a lot of both Yuba and Sutter County. It's a problem to overcome. They do pose. I guess you do say those do pose evacuation issues for the county, certainly.
When we're dealing with South County, which is Plumas Lake, a lot of what we're talking about is a slow rise flood event. That's a majority of what we're doing. So we're going to go through our progressions and do a voluntary evacuation, and hopefully people will heed that warning and go stay with a relative or stay with a friend that's outside of the danger zone. And then when we if we have to call for that mandatory evacuation, the roads aren't going to be as clogged, and we will have a plan showing people how to get out. And that's why we have our evacuation plan. And with Caltrans, CHP, Public Works, Marysville, Wheatland, we bring them all into a room and we make that plan. We put that plan together. So it's a natural progression. It's a voluntary evacuation, mandatory evacuation, and hopefully there's fewer cars on the road, so it's more seamless.
Okay. I know it's a constant question, and this question, I think I could even step into this one a little bit. Bob Harlan's asking about the proposal by Assemblyman Gallagher to fund a third bridge, and I think all of us can agree that would be great, but you kind of have to sit back and watch this process take place, and it can't really affect immediately your planning for emergencies.
Yeah, not at this point. We have to wait and see what happens with that. If we were able to get a third bridge, that would be fantastic. But we've been hearing about a third bridge for the 40 plus years that I've been living in this community. I would love to see it. I think it would help greatly, especially in the South County. But we're just going to have to see how that plays out.
Okay. All right. So again, we're here with Scott and Brianna from Emergency Services, and a question here from Michelle wondering, are we worried about the Oroville Dam? I think we feel it's in a lot better shape than it has been in a long time. Would you say that?
I would definitely say that. I mean, I was not in attendance of the tour. Scott was, but he did go up and tour the facility, and you know, we've worked with DWR and we've heard what they have told us, and that I live in Plumas Lake and I'm comfortable.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so a few months ago I went on a tour of the facility and actually saw a PowerPoint of the fix that was occurring on the main spillway, and I was very impressed with the anchors being used and just the amount of concrete and the new technology that was going into it. And I'm not an engineer by any point, but there was engineers explaining to us how it was working, what they were doing, how they fixed the emergency spillway so it wouldn't erode, and I was very impressed with how DWR has responded to the fix of the main spillway and the emergency spillway.
Okay. Thank you. And we apologize. Occasionally we might get audio loss. I mean, this is technology, and like all technology, there are going to be glitches along the way. I mean, we've talked about, and some people are saying the sound gets lost for a second. So please stand by. Apparently it comes back again, it sounds like. And so, but talking about technology, it's always important to understand that there can be glitches in the thing, and that can go for any kind of notification system that we have. And so what's important beyond just relying on a phone call or a or technology on your phone or something like that?
So knowing where you can get your information, you can call our call center. You can actually go online and go to a specific website. We do have a link to it on our website, Yuba County Office of Emergency Services. And you can actually watch the river levels as they rise and fall. If you're in the foothills and you're concerned about fires, you can watch YubaNet Fire, and they have really good monitoring of active incidents. And just knowing your surroundings, being aware of your surroundings, understanding what threats we potentially face in this county here in Yuba. You can find that information on our website as well. It is the hazard mitigation plan, and that talks about all of the different hazards that we may face, and they're also rated on a likelihood of that impacting our county, as well as kind of the extent. So know your resources is really what I can tell you. If you understand what you may face, you're going to better understand how you need to be prepared, how you need to respond, and in the event that something like that does happen, how you can recover.
And I would just add that tune into your local radio stations. Terrestrial radio is a big one. Your television, through iPause, make sure that you're tuning into those to get the local information. They've been great to work with, and we're going to continue that relationship and push that information out through them.
Okay. And Katana, just what we're talking about is just simply this. Nothing more than a simple open discussion about emergency services in Yuba County. We're just having a chat here just to kind of find out how emergency services operate. There's no emergency declared right now. We're just kind of getting a better understanding. We're here with Scott Bryan and Brianna Schutte, our emergency services folks here, just kind of outlining some of what's taken place in the past and the important steps for preparation for any future emergency event. And there was a query, I'm backing up here. Somebody had asked about a dedicated Twitter for all the various fires and such. And I think Scott explained that we don't necessarily, emergency services is not necessarily pulled into a fire of sizes that aren't massive, essentially, or at least get to the point where they have to call in additional resources, and they turn to emergency services who can go out and get those extra resources to come into the county to assist. There are a lot of good organizations out there that do follow the ongoing fires from various agencies. UBANet has been a very good partner in this, and our supervisor Gary Bradford just noted that at UBANet Fire is a good resource on Twitter, just to follow, put that on your feed, watch them, because they are great about putting out these various fires of all sizes. They cover the major ones, they also cover the small ones, the ones that pop up. They're keeping track of those individual fire departments and such that put out notices of what's happening. And while we see them come up as well, we don't go out of our way to start putting things in our emergency services feed. We're trying to maintain something more specific, larger scale that requires the attention of the Office of Emergency Services. I hope that's clear in terms of what we're trying to do here, what you're trying to do on an ongoing basis. Is that fair to say what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Okay.
I think Gary asked a question a few minutes ago that we might have skipped over, and I know, Scott, you addressed it earlier in this feed, but maybe for people who are just tuning in now, you could talk a little bit more about traffic. He said that during the spillway evacuation, the intersection of Highway 20 and 22nd Street became quickly gridlocked because of people blocking the street getting to and from the apartments there. He says that's a huge junction for East Marysville, so maybe you could just kind of talk about the traffic and maybe what county officials you have kind of managing the flow of traffic.
So that is located in the city of Marysville, once again. CHP on Highway 20 should be heavily involved in assisting the city of Marysville in that. That was something that we have talked to Chief Sachs about after the incident, some of the incidents that had occurred during that evacuation. Some people got very upset, and it was very understandable. But as far as county resources, if they're called upon to assist, we will. But the gridlock, until we're able to get the traffic flowing, and a lot of what happened, from what we've been told, because we're not boots on the ground, we're not out on the street, so we're getting our feedback from firefighters and law enforcement and EMS, is that roads were blocked because people were getting fuel, and there was a lot of that going on. And I'm not here to say that that's the number one reason, but it played a role. And so we need to make sure that, like I said previously, that you have fuel in your car. I'm not saying that you got to drive around with a full tank, because I'd be guilty of that as well. But if you can keep a half a tank of gas in your car, and make sure that if you're evacuating, that you're not obstructing the roadway. Try to get out of the roadway as quickly as possible. Don't create more traffic than what's already there by poor decisions. So that's where we're at. Do you have anything that you'd add?
No?
Okay.
So I think that Gary, and not Supervisor Bradford, no, that Gary is our most prolific question person, had some good questions, and this one here is actually something that's been discussed before about evacuation, people that might be occupying the river bottom. So we have a fairly decent-sized homeless population. So the question is, are there any plans in place to address that in the case of whether it's a fire or rising waters, which is more directly impacting, has the potential to more directly impact that population?
You want to address that?
So in the event of a slow rise type of a flood situation, the county, as soon as we get notification or even forecasted notification of the river's rising, we make sure to notify, and typically it is through law enforcement officers going out into the river bottoms, making contact with these folks and advising them that they should leave because the water is going to rise. As far as the authority to necessarily pluck them out of the river bottoms. The county doesn't necessarily have the authority to do that. We can advise that they leave, but at that point, it's really up to those folks to seek high ground. I mean, we do the best that we can. We make sure that we make contact with every single one of them. And I know that City of Marysville, they're good about going out in their jurisdiction of that river bottom and making contact with those folks as well. But again, short of plucking them out or advising them, we don't have the authority to go in and physically remove them from the river bottoms.
And many of them know that we don't have the authority to physically remove them. And we're doing this constantly. It's not just during a slow rise event. It's we did it this spring when Bullard started releasing some water because they were going into their flood pool. So we had to notify the populations down at the river bottoms that, hey, the water's going to come up 4 to 5 feet. Be careful. You're right on the river's edge. The water's very cold. It's moving swiftly. Be careful. Don't jump in the water. It's colder than you're used to. It's coming from the bottom of the lake. And, we're providing all the essential information that we possibly can. The same information that's going out over social media, and the same information that's going out to the rest of our citizens.
And it should also be noted that this is pertaining to folks that are in the river bottoms. If they're up on the levee, that is up to the levee maintenance agencies or the reclamation districts. They do have ways that they can protect the levees if it becomes a public safety issue.
Okay. I'm going to circle back to one other issue that kind of came up. I heard it twice now. These are questions that are kind of newer to us, and you can address it however you see fit. But the idea that we do have a large-scale project being built right in the smack dab center of the county, and people wonder that with the casino project, and one question was from Jennifer, and I think there was somebody else also that asked this question earlier. Will that create possible congestion during an evacuation, say to Plumas Lake heading towards 65 or heading to 65 or heading towards Highway 70, either way? Will that create a problem? Are any thoughts about plans to address this right now? I have no idea what the answer is, but the question's been asked twice now.
I would foresee that it would not be an issue, because if we were having a slow rise event where we were feeling that the water was going to peak, and to understand our slow rise plan is that the water has to reach a certain level, and if we're doing voluntary evacuations, then hopefully those people are checking out of their hotel rooms, and they've heeded the warning, and they've gone, and I don't think there's a couple different ways that they can go. I don't think that at this point, with the 100 and something odd rooms that they have, that we're going to be seeing an issue with that at this point.
Okay. And I think that probably I'm guessing that our public is kind of having a hard time understanding that you've worked through two types of emergency. One is an all at once, and another one is progressive. A fire that starts out in an area is progressive. A waters rising in a river are kind of progressive, kind of creating areas of concern. So there is a big difference between what we saw back in February of 2017 and what you typically see. Is that correct?
Very much so. There are incidents that you can forecast. A great example of that would be, look at the hurricanes. They've been planning for the hurricanes to hit Florida recently for weeks. With weather, we generally have the ability to forecast that, and that is the weather based on the impacts of that weather we will have forecasted river levels, and that is everything that our slow rise flood plan is based on. There's been a lot of time. I can't take credit for it. I wasn't here at that point in time, but Scott worked very diligently with a lot of really smart folks to put together this slow rise flood plan, and it has worked seamlessly. And then there's the Oroville spillway situation where everything is good 1 second and boom, the trigger's pulled and everybody's fleeing for the hills. And that is a completely different type scenario. Generally, that's not a scenario that we face. Even fires, to some extent, once they start, they can be forecasted. However, when we do have weather elements and topography and everything lines up just right, it can be catastrophic, as we witnessed with the campfire last year. There's always that potential, but again, the best thing that we can say is be prepared, know the hazards, know your ways out, and know which ways you'll go, and know where to go for the information to make sure that your ways that you will typically go are not impacted. Even if that means changing the way you go home every day and taking a different route home, once or twice a week, even if it adds a couple extra minutes on your time, you have then ingrained a second way out. Those are just little habits that you can integrate every day that will pay off in the event of a disaster.
Okay. Got the question about UFOs. We're going to skip over that one.
Wyatt just earlier asked, in fairness, is it safe to say that many of these questions should be directed to the county law enforcement and fire service leaders? Could you just maybe remind listeners kind of who's involved in just overall emergency preparedness response when an emergency happens, who gets looped in, who kind of creates this team?
So when I spoke of the disaster council earlier, that does include fire and law enforcement. So we in OES write plans and we support an ongoing disaster or event. And it doesn't have to be a disaster, it can be an event, it can be a parade, it can be whatever. But we have law enforcement and fire, we work with them very closely, and they are on our disaster council with our board of supervisors. They read all of our plans, they approve our plans, and once the disaster council approves our plans, then they go to the board of supervisors for approval. So the plans that we write are ones for the board. They're policy level decision making. So the board, during an incident, has that information in their pocket. They can look up the policy that they've already approved, and they know where we're going. And that's why we update plans. Our slow rise flood plan in January and February of 17, it got better. It was unfortunate that the event occurred, but now we don't have to close Simpson Lane as early because we know that it's not going to inundate until a certain level. We had erred on the side of caution 2 feet. So now we know that it's getting better. We're going to continue to get better until that thing is so dialed in. It's going to continue to grow just like our other plans, and like our emergency operations plan. It grows, it gets better, it gets more precise, and like I said, we work with the Fire Safe Council. We meet with the Sheriff's Department regularly. We work with the Terrorism Task Force, which is law enforcement and fire. And so I would say that you may have some questions for the sheriff, and I would welcome you to reach out to him, and I'm sure he'd be happy to speak with you. But for the purposes of what we're doing here today, I think this is the perfect venue.
Is the Disaster Council open to the public?
Yes, it is.
There you go. Okay, we're getting low on time here. If you have a couple more questions, that's fine. I'm going to draw you back to the bepreparedyuba.org page because it's a great resource. It has steps on how to make a plan for your family. It has steps for how to make a go bag, put it together to make sure you're ready to go. It's an important thing to have it in your car with you at all times. So just think about this. Also, on this page, you'll find things like links to river levels, which is kind of nice during the rainy seasons. There's resources for kids and teachers where kids can learn more about emergency preparedness and what would help them in a situation. Of course, the public safety power shutoff is a big deal these days. We have a little bit of information on there as well. Just encourage you to go to this page at bepreparedyuba.org and look at it, kind of go click through all the different clickable links on the side and scroll down, read everything. Very good resource as we're kind of wrapping this up. Are there any final thoughts that anybody has here as we get ready to close?
You know, Bree just brought something up, and I think it is important for people to understand who we are and what our background is. So I started off as a youngster at the sheriff's office, and I spent approximately 6 years there before moving to the Special Investigations Unit, and I've been with OES for about 13 and a half years. And Brianna, I'll let you give your background.
So I have been with OES for going on what? Four and a half years?
Yeah.
4 years? 4.5 years? And my prior background to that is working in the emergency room, emergency medical services, fire, and I've been in emergency services in a response form or fashion for at least 14 years, at least. I'd have to recount that, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I ran out of fingers and toes. So rest assured that, you know, there may be concerns, and definitely if we feel like we are overstepping or speaking on behalf of law enforcement or fire and they are better fit to answer certain questions, we will definitely recognize that and help pull in some of those correct answers or pull in some of those correct people to answer those questions. But as for Scott, he understands law enforcement. I have an understanding of fire. You know, so we do have a good understanding of, we're not just writing plans and having never been out in the field and fought a fire or, you know, dealt with evacuations or, you know, taken down bad guys. So. Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead. There's another question that popped up here towards the end. We're getting towards the end with Bob Harlan again. He's wondering if there will ever be a true and accurate, when do we expect a true and accurate inundation map? It's hard to tell where the safe elevations were. And of course, as he even says himself, that kind of depends on what the emergency situation is. I know that we had inundation maps for a dam failure. We didn't have, from Oroville, we didn't have inundation maps for a spillway failure, and it didn't even know what that looked like necessarily in terms of inundation. So is that something that, do you want people looking at inundation maps to figure out whether they're going to leave or not, or that's always a question.
So is that a local inundation map that he did?
I think he's looking for something local, yeah.
Well, it's hard because of topography, and we don't know where the breach would occur. Without that, it's really impossible to be able to provide that inundation map. So unfortunately, the best thing to do is, if we're advising of a voluntary or a mandatory evacuation, to please listen to heed the warning, evacuate, and we will provide you with information. We will keep you up to date. I have all the faith in Russ and Rachel that they are going to provide you with the information. We're not here to not provide you with information. We are here to provide you with information because that helps put your mind at ease. And we have people in here that are answering phones. So when we have an incident, you can use our main line, and it's going to roll over into our call center, and you're going to get a Yuba County resident or a Yuba County employee answering your phone, and they are going to be able to tell you what's going on. So that's the best answer I can give.
If I can add to that, I would say that it's also important to keep in mind that maps and inundation mapping is created based on a series of assumptions. And so those maps are only as good as those assumptions are. And every storm is different. Every storm brings different amounts of rain. Every storm has a different impact to the situation that we're looking at or that's at hand in that moment. And so to create a map that truly reflects the inundation has to be created within that moment. It has to be created based on that forecast. And even if we have a forecast, there have been times where storms come through and they're forecasted to move through rather quickly, but they stall. And that map goes out the window because that impact is going to be far greater or have far more potential to be more significant in that moment. So I think it's basing your decision off of maps. It's all based on assumptions, and we prefer not to err on assumptions.
So you'd like everybody to kind of look to emergency services during a large-scale event like that for where to go and how to move safely away from the situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, and just again quickly, I know we talked about the idea of planning, having your own family plan or personal plan made up now before an emergency happens. So Myra had a question about, in case of emergency, what if we don't have a car? Can we call someone? I would think you'd first want that person to try to get a plan with somebody else to help them get out. Is that, I've heard that before, is that correct?
Absolutely. Try to get your own network of folks. If you don't have a vehicle, try to set up something with your neighbor if there's an emergency, a family friend, a family member, whoever it may be. But at the end of the day, if you are stranded and you cannot get out and there is the threat of harm, we are going to do everything we can to get to you and get you evacuated.
Okay, thank you. Ted had a question, some questions, comments here, basically about creating maps. We've actually gotten much better at creating maps on the fly, using a Google interface, I believe, to show what roads people shouldn't be on, to show what roads are safe. So that's something that people are seeing more and more, and they saw it during the Cascade Fire. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there are more situations. Anyway, folks, we are folding on time here, but we appreciate it. I would encourage you that, again, when you get a chance, go to the BePreparedYuba.org site, move around it, find out what's there. Also, what's the phone number for Office of Emergency Services again?
530-749-7520.
Okay, and keep track of us on this Facebook page, and also make sure you get to BePreparedYuba.org. Ask questions, call. We're fine with that. If you have more questions here, I encourage you to type your questions in after this. We'll try to keep track of it and answer questions in later days. If you watch this broadcast later on, we're more than happy to try to answer questions ongoing. Again, my name is Russ Brown, and I'm one of the communications folks with Yuba County. I'm here with Rachel Rosenbaum, also with Yuba County in the communications. We're working together to kind of help people get the information that's important to situations. Right now, we work in general terms because there's no emergency, but during emergency situations, two things will happen. We'll be working full-time on emergency here, communications here, and the yubacounty.org page will turn into an emergency page during an emergency, so you don't have to worry about necessarily finding out where the emergency page is. Yuba.org will have that, will take you right there where you need to go to find out what the emergency is, what the escape routes are, where the shelters are, what you need to do to get yourself to safety. To Scott and Brianna, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. We talked about this for a couple weeks, and we finally decided to get it done. We'll try to do more of these to help people get updated information. But for now,
Thank you for
thank you very
joining us.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
take care. Bye-bye.